Let me begin by explaining why a reserve bank might be interested in early childhood development. Part of our job as a regional reserve bank, as the regional part of our nation's central banking system, is to understand how economic growth is unfolding in our region and in our national economy more broadly. Around our region, we hear frequently from our contacts and partners throughout the district, the 5th Federal Reserve District, which runs from Maryland down through the Carolinas and includes almost all of West Virginia. We hear that the long-run vitality of a community depends crucially on the skills of its people. Economists, and increasingly others, refer to such skills as human capital. It has become apparent that human capital investment is a critical determinant of an economy's longer-run potential, and this is true both at the national level and at the regional level, at any level you want to think about. As policymakers, we're interested in whether the investments in skills through education and work experience that we are making the most of the raw abilities that each new cohort of Americans brings with them. At the Richmond Fed, we found it useful to look at questions regarding early childhood education through the broader lens of lifelong human capital investment. So this is where Jeff would normally have his usual disclaimer, saying that the views to be expressed are his and not necessarily those of anyone else in the Federal Reserve System. But for today, I'll sign on to these ideas. So at least one other person in the Federal Reserve System shares the ideas. But I won't venture beyond that. The human capital approach that we use for thinking about investments in skill, whether at early childhood stages or otherwise, treats skills as one of many kinds of investments available to individuals. It views skill acquisition choices as influenced by the associated payoffs or the returns, just like any other investment. You incur some cost up front and you earn returns later over time. This approach allows for thinking about these payoffs as monetary or non-monetary, such as the pleasure of experiencing learning or having an intellectually challenging job. Looking at things in the form from the point of view of an investment suggests that human capital investments ought to be front-loaded, that is, occur primarily earlier or occur importantly earlier in life rather than later in life, and this is for 3 reasons. First, early investment provides a longer time horizon over which to reap rewards and recoup the cost of investment. Second, investing late is costlier in terms of foregone opportunities from spending time learning rather than working, because earnings inevitably rise with age and experience to some extent for any given level of educational attainment. Third, there is compelling evidence that skill begets skill. Investments in human capital early in life make investments later in life more productive, and increase the return to later investments as well. This is a form of complementarity. That's one of economists' favorite words, complementarity. And it's complementarity between early and later investments in human capital, and it's a key theme that I'll come back to later in these remarks. It suggests that we ought to think about early childhood education within this broader context of human capital investments that take place later in life, and a lot of that is formal education, and an area in which we have substantial public funding aimed at providing the means and facilities for people to acquire formal education. These include universal availability of free public K through 12 education and a highly subsidized public college system thereafter. Let me give you a sense of the scale of support for education generally from primary, secondary, and higher education in the United States. Taken together, expenditures on public elementary schools, secondary schools, and public degree-granting post-secondary institutions amounts to close to 6% of GDP. That's a fairly large number, and it's a level that's similar, by the way, in most developed nations, although the precise mix among different levels of education varies. Public elementary and secondary schools account for about 2/3 of these expenditures in the U.S. This makes public school essentially free for all, so that the attendees of public K through 12 schools, far from being disproportionately underprivileged, constitute a very broad cross-section of American households. To what extent has the widespread public provision of education given us a cohort ready for higher education in the workplace? A brief glance at summary measures suggests that we could do better. Nationwide, about 20% of high school students fail to graduate within 4 years, with the number being as high as 40% in some large urban school districts. At public 4-year degree granting institutions, over 40% of enrollees fail to graduate within 6 years. At the same time, our country appears to be experiencing what economists refer to as skill-biased technical change. That's a mouthful. It just means a situation in which new technologies tend to require more skills to operate and thus increase the demand for more skilled workers. Yet our investments in human capital have not kept pace with this rising demand for increasingly skilled workers. After increasing rapidly for much of the 20th century, the average number of years Americans spend in school has leveled off, and since the 1970s has remained stubbornly stable at roughly 14%. The share of high school graduates who immediately enroll in 4-year college has remained constant, around 42% since 2000. But over the same period, college appears to have become an increasingly attractive proposition from an investment point of view. The most glaring evidence of our failure to keep up with rising demand for skills is that wages of college graduates, though not the wages of those with some years of college but no degree, have increased steadily relative to the wages of those with just a high school diploma. And there's an increasing gap, or what economists call wage premium for college completion. And this gap, this college premium gap, is one of the primary drivers of rising income inequality in the United States. The fact that so many students do not enroll despite a widening wage premium has profound implications. For one, it could suggest that those who do not currently enroll do not believe their odds of collegiate success are high enough to make the high returns associated with completing a degree worthwhile. Essentially, entering college and investing in college is a risky investment because you don't know if you're going to succeed. You can see the statistics that tell you that if you succeed, the wage return looks like, on average, it's quite high, but people have uncertainty about their ability to succeed. In other words, K through 12 education system could be failing to produce enough college-ready graduates to respond to the increasing demand. Indeed, K through 12 systems seem to have acknowledged this, and college readiness is becoming an area of focus at high schools nationwide. It's interesting, though, that the emphasis placed by high schools on college readiness may have unintended consequences of discouraging students who view themselves as unlikely to attend college. If students believe the only reason to succeed in high school is to attend college, they or their families might not see much value in doing what is required to graduate from high school, so it could have an unintended perverse effect, in fact. This can contribute to poor performance and high school dropout rates in high school, and to the increasingly frequent reports we hear from employers that are having trouble finding adequately prepared workers for jobs that do not require a college degree. All right, so what does all this mean for early childhood efforts? Returning to the topic of the day. Let me return to the idea of complementarity. If parents are aware of the limited ability of their K through 12 system to prepare students for college or to provide them with useful skills when college is not their best option, then they may be less likely to make the effort needed to extract the most benefits from early childhood development. So one possible side effect of deficiencies in our K through 12 system is that the value of early childhood education may be diluted or less than it could be. The last point drives home a key theme I want to highlight. The ability of our K through 12 educational system to help people realize their potential will affect what results we can expect from early childhood investments. This view represents the flip side of the familiar idea that early human capital investment improves the efficacy of later educational investments, and which is the implication, the main implication of complementarity between early childhood education and later education that is most often highlighted, and it's something that Nobel economist James Heckman has emphasized in much of his writing on the topic. One might think of this as a discouraging idea, that underperformance of the K through 12 system would dampen returns to ECE, early childhood education. But it also has a more encouraging message. Early childhood investments made in conjunction with well-functioning educational systems beyond may be capable of yielding even greater payoffs than what research has uncovered so far. Another important theme that emerges from the human capital literature is that human capital is multidimensional. Any attribute or skill that rewards the individual is a part of human capital. Cognitive skills, that is, the mental abilities that relate to learning, problem solving, and so on, are an important part of an individual's human capital. Cognitive skills have been shown to be associated with positive outcomes in adulthood, but non-cognitive skills, such as initiative and motivation, are also critical. Indeed, Heckman and other scholars have argued that it is largely, or importantly, through the channel of non-cognitive skills that early childhood interventions lead to better outcomes in adulthood. Such skills make it possible for us to acquire more complex cognitive skills, and they also are critical for success in the labor market. Non-cognitive skills, by their very nature, are harder to measure. But make no mistake, they are clearly relevant. For example, we routinely hear from employers and workforce development professionals around our district that a lack of soft skills is a major obstacle to hiring and employment. It is also true, however, that the positive effects of early childhood intervention, especially on cognitive outcomes, may sometimes fade out over time. And this has been the subject of some research reports that have received considerable attention in recent years. This can potentially be true for both model programs, which are typically small, intensive, high-quality interventions, as well as for large-scale public programs such as Head Start. An early study compared outcomes for children who participate in Head Start with those of their siblings who did not. The use of siblings allowed the researchers to study differences in outcomes that were not attributable to family circumstances. The study found that while both white and African American students experienced gains in test scores initially, the gains for the latter diminished after they left the program, while this was not true for the white students. Subsequent research has confirmed some of these sorts of fade-out effects. This suggests that human capital, like its physical counterpart, may depreciate in the absence of ongoing high-quality investment. The challenge of fade-out may be related to the link between parental circumstances and K-12 school quality in the United States. The K-12 system here is heavily dependent on local economic conditions for funding. Property taxes, on average, raise about 36% of all revenue needed to run public K-12 schooling. Not surprisingly, school districts with higher median incomes raise more revenue locally, and despite attempts by state and federal funding to offset this, they tend to spend more on instruction per student. By contrast, in most other developed nations, this link is less strong, and local property taxes are less important. The Norwegian model of financing, for example, almost completely decouples parental circumstances from the revenue collected within a school district. This is an important point to bear in mind. Early childhood efforts in the United States must fight a headwind created by the prevailing model of school funding, something that they may not face elsewhere. Indeed, the correlation between school funding and parental income might help explain why the gains from early childhood education appear less persistent for some demographic groups. Another challenge is being able to provide quality early childhood education on a large scale. The most successful programs tend to be those that are intensive and use trained personnel to target relatively small groups of students. On the other hand, research on the effectiveness of large-scale programs suggests that the gains from these programs can be smaller and less persistent. A recent study of Tennessee's voluntary pre-kindergarten program has been widely cited for its negative findings. By second grade, students who participated in the program actually performed worse than those who did not. The lessons of this study are still being investigated, but we do know that within other large-scale programs, such as Head Start, more intensive interventions, such as full-day service and frequent home visits, are associated with better outcomes. This drives home the point that attention to measuring and monitoring quality of services is key, and that's an inconsistency. And it appears that inconsistency of quality is a likely component of the explanation for the results in the Tennessee program. The level of intensity to maintain high quality would be costly to sustain in large-scale programs, and so it follows that there must be a trade-off between the quality of the intervention and the number of children that it can reach. If funding for early childhood education is going to be constrained, as seems likely to be the case over the medium term, then I believe a case can be made for targeting resources to those for whom outcomes would change the most. There's widespread agreement in the academic literature that the greatest improvement in outcomes from early childhood programs are experienced by disadvantaged students, for example, those coming from families with low incomes or less parental education. Research has also found that such targeted spending is likely to have a larger effect on reducing the persistence of inequality across generations than broad-based spending. It's a good thing that some easily observable characteristics can tell us whose outcomes are likely to be benefited most by early childhood efforts, because it opens a path to setting eligibility requirements and judiciously targeting resources. Such targeting has in fact been a feature of some early childhood investments. For example, the Minnesota Early Learning Scholarships Program gives preschool-age children from low-income families access to early childhood education by paying scholarships directly to the program of their choice. From 2016 onward, the programs will be required to maintain a minimum rating to be eligible for funds, which connects again to the importance for measuring and monitoring and assessing quality in programs as being an important ingredient for the judicious targeting of scarce resources to early childhood investments. There is a more general principle that we need to keep in mind when thinking about the allocation of public funding, which is the importance of equalizing marginal societal benefits, another mouthful of economist jargon, which means that the next dollar spent ought to yield society the same bang for its buck, no matter how it's ultimately allocated. The next dollar you spend on this should give us the same marginal impact as the next dollar you spend on that. This principle, the reason for that is that if that's not true, then you can increase total social benefits by reallocating spending. This principle ought to guide how we balance competing resource demands. We at the Richmond Fed and many others have long argued that a more balanced portfolio of educational spending would devote more resources to early childhood education than we currently do. The logic is that under current arrangements, the marginal return to investments in early childhood appear to be exceptionally large relative to other educational expenditures. But at the beginning of these remarks, I discussed the idea that human capital investments at various stages in life are complementary. The idea has important implications for what an appropriately balanced portfolio of education spending looks like. The evidence suggests that investments in early childhood can increase the effectiveness of human capital investments made later in life. and can improve the skills of our workforce in the years ahead. But at the same time, our K through 12 education system appears to be underperforming and in need of improvement. Improving the effectiveness of K through 12 can improve workforce skills and can also increase the long-term payoffs to early childhood investments. In conclusion, I should note that while what we have learned so far clearly underscores the power of early childhood education, even more remains to be learned about the interplay of forces that determine its ultimate efficacy. I'll leave you with the idea that we can only unlock the full transformative potential of early childhood education in the context of effective human capital investment in K through 12 and beyond. Thank you for your attention.